So the classic underdog story really is quintessential cinema. Over the years, Hollywood has showcased countless heroic individuals who rose to the occasion against seemingly insurmountable odds. And now Angel Studios, a faith-based studio that has kind of been authoring its own underdog success story in recent years, is following in that storytelling legacy with its own film, The Last Rodeo. Will it have a happy ending, or is the film a bumpy ride? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So, if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that for the most part, I've been impressed by most of the films that have come out of Angel Studios, and The Last Rodeo is one that just seems to be getting a pretty heavy marketing push, and all the familiar crowd-pleasing genre elements are present, but unfortunately, the film just struggles to hang on to them long enough for that prize-winning ride. Because sadly, I was just not a big fan of this film. I think The Last Rodeo does have the seeds of a compelling story and does have some redemptive themes kind of scattered throughout. But it's just ultimately let down by a very lackluster script and poor execution. The story itself is about Joe Wainwright, who is played by actor Neil McDonough, who is a retired bull riding legend who attempts one final ride in order to win prize money needed to pay the substantial medical bills for his grandson's urgent surgery, and toss in a subplot of lost and rediscovered Christian faith. And the film does seem to have all the makings of a very satisfying faith-based story. The overall acting performances by the cast is largely hit or miss, but I think actor Neil McDonough is obviously a Hollywood mainstay for a reason, and I think he does have a very captivating screen presence and just an impressive physicality in the central role as Joe Wainwright, even if the character isn't really developed all that much further than his gruff exterior. I should say too that the faith-based genre has historically aimed, I think, primarily at more feminine sensibilities, with middle-aged women statistically at least being the biggest audience demographic for the genre. But The Last Rodeo is unapologetically masculine. I think kind of a story of manly men doing manly things is a welcome development in an entertainment industry that has really been trending away from or deconstructing or even villainizing traditional masculinity. Although admittedly, and maybe this is just me, but The Last Rodeo does sometimes feel almost like the equivalent of those notorious over-the-top Christians men's ministry events that pack out stadiums to watch monster trucks and listen to classic rock music. Thus you have the almost in-your-face masculinity of macho bull riders standing around shirtless and knocking back drinks and kind of gruffly declaring things I'm going to kick your blank, which, hey, if I had McDonough's body at the age of 60, I'd probably be ditching my shirt too. And opinions will probably vary on this. Personally, I'm not wholesale opposed to the inclusion of profanity in faith-centric stories if I think such language is warranted and authentic to the story, as I think something director Martin Scorsese has demonstrated with some of his films. At the same time, I do find kind of the recent tendency to use profanity almost as a sort of cheap gimmick to prove to audiences that this isn't your grandfather's faith-based film genre, to be somewhat cringeworthy and unnecessary. On the one hand, harsh language is certainly not uncommon to hear at a rodeo, but to me, it just feels somewhat at odds with the softer and more traditional evangelistic tone of the rest of the movie. I think kind of in a way, The Last Rodeo feels almost trapped in an awkward middle ground between the sanitized expectations of the faith-based film genre and the more hypothetical gritty mainstream Hollywood version of the story, and I think results in a movie that may fail to please either audience. The bigger issue to me, however, is just this film's almost maddening tendency to tell rather than show, because much of the story's most compelling drama is just shared through extensive dialogue rather than being displayed on screen. Where almost the entire first half of this movie unfolds in sequential scenes in which various characters just sit around delivering lengthy exposition dumps to fill in their backstories. I think these events just would be far more more compelling if viewers could actually like see them even just like as flashbacks and like make those connections themselves. And it's almost like in like an inverted version of Ernest Hemingway's famous like iceberg theory that says that like key elements of a story don't have to always be like spelled out, but are better left like implied. And like rather than the backstories in this movie like adding a sense of like emotional depth and like meaning to the main plot, just the insistence on like continually narrating all of the unseen exposition like beneath the water distracts from the story instead of like supporting and enhancing it. For example, Joe Wainwright's like Fall from Grace is told like entirely through like retrospective dialogue rather than like being shown on screen. And like multiple scenes describe Joe and Charlie's like relational history and how Charlie was like in a dark place and how they served together in the army. And when like the duo later like, encounters Jimmy, who's like the head of the rodeo competition, their shared history is once again delivered through like a very lengthy dialogue heavy scene. And even the film's like climactic ending skips forward in time like 6 months with the winner of the competition revealed through dialogue rather than allowing like audiences the satisfaction of like seeing it play out. And there's like a TV interview from like that long past event that just like inexplicably plays on the TV during that final scene and like fills in some of the narrative gaps despite like half a year having passed, which is just one of many I think kind of logic defying like conveniences in the movie. And I think like, at least to me like as a result, the film can sometimes feel more like trekking through like a Wikipedia page than it does being like swept up in a cinematic story, as like audiences are just repeatedly told like why they should be invested in the characters and the storylines rather than the story like itself earning that support. As far as kind of to consider things going on the surface of this, like I said, there probably is more profanity in this than might be expected from like a faith-based film. Because by my count, there was about 15 to 16 kind of minor profanities in this, including words that start with the letters A and D and H. And that probably is sort of the extent of the content in the film. Because violence, nothing really for violence other than characters getting kind of like bruised and bumped from bull riding. Sexuality, nothing for that either. The only other kind of content thing is that there are characters that I speak of and are shown consuming alcohol. As far as themes, worldview, like things going on beneath the surface, as mentioned earlier, like a central theme in this film is just like a celebration of, I think, traditional masculinity. Because even in like several pre-release interviews that I've seen, actor Neil McDonough has stated that this movie is sort of like a challenge for men to man up and like do what needs to be done for their family and loved ones. And masculinity has become like a very hot button conversation in today's culture, often discussed with the label toxic preceding it. And I think while like The Last Rodeo doesn't necessarily like add to that ongoing conversation in any like direct way, it does provide a very clear sort of counterpoint and like positive representation of manhood. And narratively, I think Joe Wainwright's like personal journey is one that I think many viewers of either gender will be able to find relatable, even if they don't share like the same experiences. Because this film largely explores this, so-called problem of pain and just the question of like why a loving God allows so much suffering in the world. Because on the outside, Joe is a very like strong, no-nonsense kind of manly man, but there are several scenes that just show him struggling to like contain his emotions and like the anger and hurt that he harbors inside. And the primary target of that anger is God, who he blames for the hardships that he has experienced in his life, such as like the tragic loss of his wife to a terminal illness, or the collapse of his bull riding career due to injury, and then now like in the film, sort of his grandson developing the same illness that ultimately took his wife. And this anger has kind of led Joe to like a crisis of faith, where he appears to like still believe in God, but just no longer wants anything to do with him. Along the way, he is like encouraged by his good friend Charlie, who seems to have like gone through a very similar like dark time of anger and resentment towards God in his own life, only to ultimately find peace by returning to God. I think the film doesn't attempt to offer like simplistic answers to the problem, but instead the story offers a more, I think, personal response, where it just kind of demonstrates that like pain and suffering are real, but like in the middle of that brokenness sort of is when God's love is most needed, and I think felt most profoundly. So, in the end, I think The Last Rodeo will likely find an audience eager to embrace its inspirational story or like Christian themes and like refreshingly masculine tone. But I think, like trying to hang on to a bucking bull, the cinematic experience itself is unfortunately just a bumpy ride. And if Hollywood's underdog stories have taught us anything, it's that we can celebrate like the effort and like heart of these unsung heroes, but must also accept that like, even the most noble intentions don't always end up in victory. I think The Last Rodeo Rodeo has its heart in the right place, but at the end of the day, this is simply too derivative and I think poorly scripted to finish its tale as a triumph. But hey, I would love to hear what you guys think. If you guys enjoyed this film more than I did, or if you maybe had some of the same issues, don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.